Alrighty then, how you guys doing? Disco ball, that's new. I'm Gary with the Arizona Psychedelic Society, and we are here tonight to hear a speaker. His name is Michael Roviello. How do you say it? Roviello? Okay. It's Italian. I thought I'd pick it right up. A few things though. So we are right now currently trying to put together this year's conference. Okay? And we've got a committee put together. We could always use more help if anybody's interested in helping. If anybody has any ideas about locations or potential speakers even that we might tap into, please hit one of us up. Could the committee members please stand up that are here tonight so everybody knows who they are? And obviously I'm one of them too, but you can come talk to any of us anytime. And we're taking donations also, so if anybody wants to donate to the cause, it's very helpful. Everything costs money nowadays, and so trying to put all this kind of stuff together, money talks and everything else just kind of stays fun. But I don't want to take up any more of your time. I want to get Michael up here. So please give a hand for Michael, and he's going to come and talk to you about his journey. It's an amazing story.
Okay, perfect. Hi everybody, thank you guys for showing up tonight. Appreciate you. Thanks to Gary, Adam, and Coral for helping to organize this. They invited me to come on and have a conversation about just a little bit about my story, my path to psychedelics, my time in the U.S. military, and I'm open to any questions, any feedback that you guys have throughout the conversation. I'll probably focus this more on my path and kind of how I got into psychedelics, and then essentially how it helped to find my way out of physical pain. It's kind of really where it started, physical pain. But my journey began in Queens, New York, born and raised Italian-American family, and I ultimately spent the first quarter of my life living in Queens. And Queens is a concrete jungle. It's busy sounds and city and lots of people and pretty crazy place. And what was beautiful about that situation growing up like that is I was raised around a lot of different cultures. Queens is probably one of the most diverse places in the world. A lot of people, it's their first landing spot when they come to the U.S. And so I was blessed by being able to have that opportunity to just mix with so many different cultures, and it was really beautiful. But ultimately, I learned a lot through this situation living in New York City. Just gonna see my slides here. I was raised by a single mom, and I didn't have a whole lot of support at home. She did her best to essentially support us and help us really be raised in a crazy city and not get into too much trouble. But ultimately, I had to find my way out of that busy city and into something different. So at the age of 20, I joined the U.S. Navy and went into the U.S. Navy helicopter search and rescue program. And so prior to that, just like life is lifing, and I had challenges with my father, challenges growing up broke, all kinds of different scenarios, my mom raising 4 kids on her own. And so it was time for me to make a significant change and just to do something different. So ultimately, I joined the U.S. Navy Helicopter Search and Rescue Program. Our motto was so others may live. And I got an opportunity to really fly all around the world. My first stop was in Pensacola, Florida. That's where the Navy aviation training is. And then after Navy aviation training, we went out to San Diego, and that's where I was permanently stationed in Coronado. Any other veterans in the room? You got a few? Awesome. Thank you guys for your service. And in the military was a great experience for me. I got a chance to really push myself. I lacked a lot of mentorship and discipline in my life, and the Navy gave me an opportunity to really test myself to see what I was capable of as a young man. I think that's really important for young men to essentially have that challenge. And in the Navy, there's a lot of different directions you can go. I mean, there's many different jobs. I was lucky enough to choose this program because the guy who I was speaking to about going into military service, he said, man, if you can get into this program, it is a badass job. And you're going to be able to see the world and do some really high-speed, cool stuff. So at the age of 20, I was really excited. And ultimately, I needed that discipline. When I was hanging out in Queens, I was really influenced by the wrong people. The guys I looked up to were really getting into trouble, so I was really on a path to nowhere. And my mom, raising 4 kids, it's a difficult thing to do, especially when you have a son. There's only so much that she can do. So I was kind of looking up to the wrong people in my neighborhood and really influenced by essentially the wrong people. So I was on a path to nowhere. So getting out and just putting myself in a brand new environment really started to change everything. Plus I got to see people from all over the country. New York's its own culture, especially Queens and Brooklyn and the boroughs, its own culture. It's drastically different than people who live upstate New York. And so living around people from the South, from the West Coast, from the Midwest was really eye-opening for me because there's a lot of different cultures just in our own country here. It was beautiful. And when I was in the U.S. Navy, we wear many hats, jack of all trades. When you're flying helicopters every day, there's a lot of different missions that helicopters do. So one of the main missions that we did was search and rescue. So if you're out at sea, somebody's distressed, there's a boat capsizing, we're the first people to respond. Coast Guard obviously handles the coast. In the middle of the ocean, it's all U.S. Navy. And there's a lot of stuff that happens out at sea. We also are submarine hunters. So our main job was tracking and hunting submarines. Has anybody ever seen the movie Hunt for Red October?
Oh yeah.
Right, great movie. My boss was in that movie. It's a famous scene where Alec Baldwin is being lowered down to a submarine to go speak with the skipper. The guy that's in the door lowering down was my old boss. So our main job was to hunt and track submarines. And how do we do that? By listening, using acoustics under the water. We could listen to all kinds of sounds, and we studied oceanography, and we really just start to learn about sound, frequency, and vibration. And little did I know, I'd be learning a different chapter later on in my life about sound, frequency, and vibration. But we used it at the time to basically hunt submarines, track them all over the world. I became a weapons expert. Helicopters, they have Hellfire missiles, we have door guns, we have pretty much packed with everything that we need for a variety of different operations. And we use torpedoes as well for hunting submarines. So I became a weapons expert. So early on in my younger years, I started to train my mind on how to destroy things. That's what I was trained to do. And if you're really good at destroying things and you're really efficient at it, you kind of work your way up the ranks. And so I got really good at learning how to destroy things. I was also a combat rescue crewman, which means that we worked with special operations. So I got the opportunity to work with Navy SEALs. We were their delivery vehicle. We flew them into hostile territory. We flew them out of hostile territory. That's why we had door guns. So I got to really work with some of the most elite forces in the world, which was a great opportunity, and also great training. But all of these things, they have their pros and their cons. They can weigh on you over time. I was very early on in both conflicts that the United States had. So September 11th happened, September 2001, and 2 months later I was in Afghanistan. So I was a young man, training, learning how to destroy stuff, and then I got my first opportunity to go to war. And in November of 2001, we were the first aircraft battle group to participate in that conflict. Just a few years later, George Bush Jr. decides that he wants to invade Iraq. And so I was also part of that first wave in conflict. So in really a short period of time, I got to see 2 different conflicts in 2 different regions and essentially be part of the operations there. And so that's a little bit of history about my Navy career. There's a lot of beautiful things that came out of my Navy career, that's for sure. U.S. Navy helped me to become a leader. As a young person, you are given a ton of responsibility. I remember getting my first corporate job out of the U.S. military, and the amount of trust that they placed in people was so minimal compared to the amount of trust that we had because of the cost of these aircraft, the cost of the weapons, the cost of all these systems, and then of course, people can die and get hurt if you don't do your job right. So I really learned a lot of skill sets on just how, not perfection, but how to just be accountable. When you sign your name on something that you've inspected it, like really serious. When I got into the corporate world, like people just didn't give a shit. So it was really, really interesting to just have that sort of training. It was beautiful. I got to see the globe. I got to go to Iwo Jima. Who gets to go to Iwo Jima? I got to go to Saipan, all these interesting places around the world. I spent time in Tinian, which is essentially the island where they launched the plane to drop the atomic bomb. Like all of these things I've read about in history books. I got to visit these places and see them. I also spent time in Asia, going to Hong Kong and Australia, and really all over the place. A lot of places that I probably wouldn't have gone to, like on vacation, I got a chance to see, explore the culture, learn about people, and really just expand my knowledge and horizons, especially on people and culture. I gained a ton of confidence, and essentially I found that mentorship and discipline that I had been looking for as a young man. Really raised, with my father, not so much as a teacher. And it was beautiful. In the U.S. Navy and the military in general, we have a motto, is essentially embrace the suck. Things are going to be crappy and shitty, but you still follow through and complete whatever the mission is. And I think it's a great skill set to have, because even in today's world, like things don't always line up the way you want them to. And so you get bad news. We get bad news all the time. And how do you continue to push forward and still deliver a good result in difficult situations? So that was like a really good program that was installed. All these is like programming, Every job you go through, you're getting programmed in some sort of way that fits, the purpose and mission of that industry. The other thing was improvise, adapt, overcome. Learning how to be flexible, mentally flexible. Some of us, right, we're so rigid that when something doesn't go the way that we want it to go, like we just get stopped in action. And when you're flying helicopter missions, you have to be flexible because the weather is going to change. Not all the intelligence that you got might be correct. Things are going to be drastically different, and you have to be flexible so that you can continue to follow through on the mission. Especially search and rescue missions, because somebody's waiting for you. You're their rescue vehicle. And we would fly at nighttime on night vision goggles, really low, really fast, really dangerous, to try to avoid enemy radar so that we can get into places quietly and pick up who we needed to and get out of there quietly. And so we learned a lot of skills in my younger years. I really left the Navy with a can-do mindset and an abundance of skills and confidence that I did not have in my younger years. And that was probably the best value that I got out of going through that program. I was discharged and then transferred to the reserves. And I also left the Navy with some challenges. So very common in the veteran community, you hear about PTSD and you hear about insomnia. Has anybody else experienced severe insomnia for long extended periods of time? I mean, it'll really get you. When you wake up, no energy, the anxiety starts to build up. You start looking at the clock, you have to be somewhere the next day, you're not well rested. And when you do that for years upon years upon years of just broken sleep, it really starts to mess with you. It really starts to mess with your ability to perform, and your irritability factor is just really high. And so I was dealing with all of that. The PTSD was a whole other story. I didn't like that label. I didn't want that label when I get out. I mean, the VA has health care, so all these options were available to me. But essentially their tools were talk therapy and medication. That was the only two tools that they had. And I saw a lot of guys in the military going down the bad hole of overly prescribed, and that scared me. So I said no to essentially a lot of those medications. And I was also dealing with some physical pain that I'll get into here shortly. And then I'll kind of tie it up on how that led to psychedelics. But ultimately, the insomnia was the big problem for me, and I really couldn't find a solution. I have a hyperactive mind. I'm always solving things. But if you really think about it, when you're born, at no point are you ever given a playbook on how this human body operates, how this thing works, the physiology. Essentially that's all. If you went to medical school to become a doctor or a physician, you'll learn about how the body works. But for the average person, whether you're going to school for business or not going to school at all, you just don't know how it works. And you essentially have to give away all of your authority to somebody who does know how the body works in order to find solutions. And you can't even ask the right questions if you don't know enough. So one of the things I really needed to do as I started to struggle with my own personal health, mental health, emotional health, physical health, I really needed to learn, how does this machine work? How does the software work up here? What's going on up here? What are some things that I can do that can be helpful outside of just mental health medications? I resorted to, common culture, the U.S. military, which was excessive alcohol. It's widely accepted, part of the culture. You work hard, you go out, and you drink a lot, and you black out, and you share, funny stories the next day, and that was the culture. If I wasn't flying, we were drinking heavily. And I never started to connect the dots of why am I drinking so much? What am I trying to avoid? What am I trying to numb? It was just part of the culture. There's nothing wrong with alcohol. So I drank a lot for a good many years of my life. I had to stop using marijuana, obviously, while I was in military service, but prior to military service, growing up in the hood in Queens, New York, we smoked a lot of blunts and smoked a lot of weed, and that was fine. I had to put it obviously on pause when I was in the service, but once I got out, I started using again. And I don't have any problems with marijuana, but I don't like anything to have a real grip on me, and that was the challenge. I felt like if I don't smoke, I can't settle down, I can't rest, that sort of thing. But ultimately, it was helpful. It helped me to fall asleep, so I used it. I didn't know much about it. I didn't know what it was doing to the body, how it works, anything like that. I just used it. Also, pharmaceuticals for pain and inflammation. I had a lot of physical pain very early on in my career. I started to have neurological issues. And I was scared because when you go to the doc and you're in a flight status and you're having any sort of issues, they're going to ground you right away, which means I'd be in the office doing administrative work, not getting to go on all the cool flights and doing all the cool stuff that I was training for. So we often keep our pain, a bit hidden. And so every time I go to the doctor, I was dealing with severe pain in my neck, big pain in my neck. I couldn't understand what it was. It would take my breath away. I wouldn't be able to perform physically. Mentally, it was really disturbing, also contributed to my insomnia. And it would come in waves throughout my military career, where for a month or so, I'd be dealing with the pain, and then I would numb it with alcohol and pain medications and anti-inflammatory pills and pretty much anything the doctor would give me. And it would disappear for a while, and then it would come back. It was a wave after wave after wave, and it was always just there, just kind of haunting me, just trying to let me know to pay attention to something. But I wasn't paying attention, and my awareness was very low. I looked at the body like it was a machine. If there's something broken, you pull it out, you rebuild it, you put it back in. I was always a car guy, so I just kind of always viewed my body as a car, as a machine. I didn't really understand the mind-body connection and how our thoughts, emotions have impact on our physical body. I looked at them as separate, which I think is still pretty much common practice. I mean, oftentimes if you go to the doctor and you're dealing with some sort of back pain, they don't really ask any questions about what's going on mentally, emotionally. And to their credit, they don't have the time. A 10-minute session, insurance, they gotta see a lot of people throughout the day. So can't really do a therapy session if you really figure out what your lifestyle is and what might be contributing to that pain. Nor do they really even have the connection that they're actually go hand in hand. It's not part of like really modern medicine. So essentially you just treat the physical body, or if you're dealing with something mental or emotional, then they'll treat the mind, all through chemicals. I really had to dive in my life of like what I was trying to numb, what that numbing situation was, and why I needed to drink so excessively in order to feel okay. And I really found out that I was lacking, lack of feeling, emotionally unavailable. I heard that a lot from my girlfriends. Heard that one quite a bit. And I really was lacking self-love. I didn't know that was something we should all be striving for. And what exactly is self-love? What does that mean? How does that show up? What are the action items to improve that? Here's a cervical spine injury that I had. It's called an ACDF. Basically, they go in and they remove some discs from your cervical spine, and then they use cadaver parts to basically fill the gaps. They allow that to fuse, and that can take up to a year. And while they're waiting for that time to fuse, what they do is they drill a titanium plate into your spine, and that allowed my neck to be stable as this fusion did its job. But they don't go back in to remove the plate just because it's too risky. So I'm left with a titanium plate in my neck for the rest of my life. And I really just had years of chronic stress, pain, inflammation, numbness, muscle spasms. I had something called clonus, where my body would shake out of control at certain points, in certain positions. And they thought initially I had multiple sclerosis, so I did all the testing for multiple sclerosis. I was losing a lot of feeling in my hand, so if I had a bottle of beer, it would just drop and break. If I was at a bar or a nightclub, I would lose my balance. I was starting to have a hard time holding in my pee. I was like, oh, that's pretty scary. I don't want to be walking around peeing my pants. So I just had a variety of neurological issues. And we couldn't quite figure out what was the source or why. But what they did is they found that my spinal cord was being compressed, and I was really happy to get that news. No to MS, yes to spinal compression. I said, I'll take that any day, because you guys can fix that. And so that's exactly what I did. I went for emergency surgery. They did the titanium plate. They put a few screws in me, and I was young at the time, so my body repaired pretty fast. I stayed home, relaxed, watched a lot of movies, and then eventually I was able to get back on my feet. But there was a lot of limitations. There was limited exercise, no more squats, no more deadlifts, none of the stuff that I was doing, no hard type of exercises. Is kind of the feedback that I was getting from the surgeons at that time. And it made sense. But ultimately, I was at a rock bottom at that element of my life. I was in really bad pain. I was nervous if I had multiple sclerosis. I was trying to find a way back to my old self, and I didn't quite know how to get there, and I got the surgery. And I thought the surgery was going to fix it all. But 12 months post-surgery, all my symptoms came back. I started having more neurological issues, balance issues, clonus issues, pain issues. This time it was showing up in the middle of my back, come in waves. Started playing that game again. I'm fine for a little while, then it would haunt me. I'm fine for a little while, then it would haunt me. And the recommendation really was to get another surgery. Go back in and ultimately fuse above and below where my fusion was already done. But it's a pretty invasive procedure. They gotta cut your throat open, they gotta move your esophagus over. The downtime is, not great. There could be severe complications, if something is done to your spinal cord. I mean, there's risk associated, right? And for some reason, I chose not to do it, and that was really the beginning of my journey. People start to come in your life at different times, and they start to drop little seeds. And this one guy came in, and I was attending something called the Landmark Forum. You guys familiar with Landmark Forum? No. And I was really starting to learn about my habits and behaviors. And he came into my life, and he talked to me about a guy by the name of Eckhart Tolle. And that was an interesting book for me because essentially it started to give me some understanding of how powerful our thoughts are. I never even thought about analyzing your own thoughts. Almost like your thoughts control you. Little did I know that, hey, I'm the driver of these thoughts. I can actually curb these thoughts. And so I started to really learn about the power of the mind. But I asked myself, there has to be another way, because I didn't want to go down the surgery route, and I didn't want to go back on the medications. I had to draw a line in the sand at some point. And ultimately, the main book, and really I want to start here because a lot of my conversation will be about the work of Dr. John Sarno. Is anybody familiar with Dr. John Sarno's work? We got one person in the room. Two, very interesting guy. And he came from traditional medicine, and that's what's so great about him is because he got to see both sides of it. And Dr. John Sarno's book, I started to understand a concept of psychosomatic pain and the mind-body connection. I had no idea that these two are connected in a very intricate way. And so I really started to adopt the philosophy of his work and put it into motion because I had already checked all the boxes. I had done all the physical stuff. I had done the surgery. I had taken the pills. I had taken the epidural shots. I pretty much did everything that Western medicine had to offer at that time. And John Sarno was talking about something completely different. He was talking about emotions and mental health causing physical pain in the body. And that was hard for me to connect. It's how my thoughts and my emotions, which I wasn't very in touch with, like I said, I was emotionally unavailable for a good portion of my life. How does that connect to physical pain? And I had to draw a line in the sand, and what I did is I drew a line in the sand and I said, from this day on, I will not take another pain medication, anti-inflammatory medication, or anything of that nature. I need to find out what that medication does and try to find an alternative. So I started learning about plants. I started learning about different plant extracts. Oh, if you take this type of plant, it's very powerful anti-inflammatory properties, and it's less, harmful on your body. Because when you are taking pain meds all the time, and if you're taking prescriptions all the time, there's negative effects of these things that often aren't spoken about. And so my blood work was coming back with elevated issues with my liver, and probably from the drinking and because it's not a good combination, right? And so I drew a line in the sand, and I told myself, from this day on, I will not take any medications. I have to find a solution, which got me in the books and got me studying. And that was really an entryway into really learning about the world of plants and the relationship that we have in our body. And it was beautiful. And I was doing these things, but I was raised in a very Western medicine type of tradition, It was you go to the doctor tells you what to do, you don't question them, you just follow suit. That's how I was raised. And so this was drastically different. So I really just started going down all the rabbit holes. I like getting information from people because people will often share what's worked well for them, but I like to try things out for myself. I need to know, I need to feel it, right? Wim Hof, we'll talk about Wim Hof today as well. Feeling is understanding. And so I also don't like to recommend things to people that I haven't done myself. And I kind of see myself as a little bit of a pathfinder. Like, I'm willing to go out there in the woods, try something that's unique and different and maybe a little bit taboo, and try it a bunch of times to really see it through, to see if it has any direct feedback on my health, mentally, physically, emotionally. And by the way, spiritually, I was a zero at this point. I had no spiritual practice. I was raised in an Italian-American household. I went to communion and confirmation. I did all of the steps of Catholicism. I went to church when I was young. We were definitely not going to church every Sunday, but if somebody passed away, if there was a wedding, I just dabbled. But I didn't really understand what was going on. I didn't really dive into that world. And so spiritually, I like to say I was a zero. I never stopped believing in God, but I didn't have a strong connection. God for me was always like, if you want to go talk to God, you go to church. And I didn't realize that you could have this relationship at home in everyday life. And so spiritually, I was a zero. So I started to go down a lot of rabbit holes. I was trying everything. But every book that I read would talk about meditation. Meditation was like, all these influencers, famous people, authors, successful people in life would always talk about how powerful meditation was. But every time I tried to meditate, I just really was thinking about what I needed to do later or what I should have done earlier that day. Like, I wasn't finding the power of that present moment. The beauty that everyone was saying, you get into these beautiful places and you can get answers from within and all of this great stuff that people were talking about meditation. I wasn't experiencing it because I didn't know how to meditate, and I didn't take a class. I just tried on my own. So I went down all the rabbit holes. I tried, what are they called? Sensory deprivation tests. That was pretty cool because that was the first time I said, I kind of get it. This whole meditation thing, like everything starts to quiet down. You start to feel the sensations of the body, and you start to be the observer of your thoughts. It's like, okay, there's something here. I'm able to cut out all the noise for the hour and actually get to a place where I was just getting little snippets of what they were talking about, meditation. And that was beautiful. I tried Reiki, you start hearing about Reiki and stuff like that. I didn't know anything about it. Tried Reiki, tried meditation, tried sound healing, eventually got to breath work. I just figured I'm gonna just try everything, and some things really moved the needle for me, and some things different because the pain was still there, still in and out. And I'm reading the books, and I'm starting to learn, and I'm really starting to implement this stuff, and certain things really moved the needle, and some things didn't. So these were kind of the 4 authors and books and people that really helped to influence me in a really positive way. Eckhart Tolle, he helped me to understand this basic concept, that the power is in the present moment. And if you constantly are thinking about the future, and you're constantly anticipating what might happen in your life, you're essentially living your life in the future. And so you're out of the present moment. And if you continue to think in this pattern, if I was to take a snapshot of all of my thoughts from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed, where was the majority of my thinking? Was it forward? Was it backward? Was it present? And I started to realize I am creating my own anxiety. I'm creating my own anxious state. I kind of classified myself as being a bit anxious. And that really helped me to understand that the power's in the present moment. If you spend too much time in the past, constantly ruminating about things, about your day, earlier that day, yesterday, 10 years ago, that will lead to patterns of depression. And so essentially we're the driver of our own thoughts. So how do I cultivate a practice of being more present in my life? That I still didn't know how to do, but I was getting there. I was making progress. Dr. Bruce Lipton, you guys familiar with his work?
Yeah.
A lot of people. He's a great guy. I think he's really been early on in the scene. He was talking about epigenetics before it was cool. And most people, I come from those type of family where it's like, oh, your grandmother had this thing and she behaved this way and she had a bum knee, so that's why you have a bum knee and you act like this. There's nothing you can do about it. It's part of your ancestry, and that's just the card that you were dealt. And so I never fully accepted that, you know, when my mom would talk about the aunt or the grandmother or something like that. I was like, it just doesn't add up, you know, it doesn't add up for me. And so his work really opened up my eyes to how our perception impacts our reality. And the power of perception, like holy cow, like we are all in this room together right now, but our perception is drastically different, you know, at every single moment. And that's driving so many physiological processes inside of our body. I mean, the easiest example I can give you is just get on a plane with somebody, and if that person's terrified of flying, and you're not terrified of flying, and you fly for work, and you're used to flying, at the time of takeoff, you could be taking a nap and be fully relaxed and okay, and just waiting to get to the next spot. But the person right next to you is terrified. And so their heart rate's elevated, their nervous system's gonna be more in that sympathetic dominance tone, their palms are sweaty, they're nervous. They're having a physiological reaction to a perceived fear, right, of flying. And so that's happening all the time in all of our interactions. And so Bruce Lipton really helped me to understand the biology of all this. And he wrote that book, The Biology of Belief, which is a great read. Dr. Joe Dispenza, he helped me out a lot as well early on. One, because he had the same surgery as I did. Our stories are very similar. We have the exact same surgery. His came from a road bike accident. But he was really helping me to understand and take a really deep dive on Dr. John Sarno's work and talking about, you know, when they do these studies all the time, you know, you always have a group that's given the medication, and then you have the other group that's given the sugar pill. And sometimes, in many cases, pretty much all the time, you get great results out of the people taking the sugar pill. Well, why did they get such great results, right, from taking the sugar pill when they weren't actually given the medication? Because they thought they were taking something that was helpful. They thought that they were, you know, making physical changes inside their body through the medication. So the placebo is really powerful. And so I started to really understand the power of placebo. And Edgar Cayce, is anybody familiar with Dr. Edgar Cayce? He's not a doctor, but Edgar Cayce. Some people in here. He was amazing. He really changed my life because, like I told you earlier, I was a spiritual zero. I had no spiritual practice. And I was like fishing around in different religions and going to college and learning about world religions and just trying to learn stuff that essentially wasn't taught to me. You know, one of the things I noticed about growing up here in Western society is that all the information that we're given about health and spirituality really comes from a European model, right? And so living here in America, living in New York is very far removed from the Native American culture. You know, it's its own place. You just don't, you see some street names and some names of towns, but the average person growing up in New York doesn't know anything about the cultures that lived and thrived in these areas. It's just not very common. Coming out to Arizona was very different for me because you can feel the Native American spirit here in the state. By the names of things, if you go to certain parts of the state, you get to interact with the people, you can see stores where they're selling the things that they make. And so I was always like a little bothered by the fact that I didn't get to learn what they had to say about spirituality, what they had to say about healing, what they had to say about where do we go when we die or where did we come from. And so that whole chapter was just really a chapter I never read. And so I really started to dive into indigenous cultures from around the world. And I got interested in not just Native Americans here in North America, but also Native people from the Amazon jungle and Central America. And who were the indigenous people of Europe? You know, who were the early, you know, people of Europe and Africa and Asia? And so I started to really study cultures from around the world, and I started to see a lot of similarities in their philosophies and medicine and way of life. And even their symbolism. I mean, you could see the flower of life burned into stones in certain regions of the world where supposedly there was no contact. And so I really started to put together some pieces to the puzzle. But Edward Gacy, he was a psychic for all those people who don't know, from the 1800s. He was raised in the Bible Belt, very Christian. I think he read the Bible from start to finish every year. And that was his pattern for his entire life. He started to develop psychic abilities very early on in his life, and ultimately was able to tap into something what they call the Akashic Records, and read not only about that person's physical life here, but also other sojourns, is what he would call them, from other lives. Where was that soul before it incarnated into the earth at this time? What was the karma that they were essentially bringing into this world? And he talked about Jesus Christ, and he talked about ancient Egypt, and he talked about Atlantis, and all of these interesting places that we've heard about. And to this day, there's about 9,000 to 10,000 documented readings at the Association of Research and Enlightenment, which is in Virginia Beach. And for every single person he did a one-on-one with, there would be a stenographer, I think that's the right word, and she would type every single word that he would say. He would lay in a bed, he would go into a trance, there'd be another person in the room getting the reading. He would start to talk differently, in a very different tone of voice and accent, and he would essentially go into the Hall of Records, read about their life, and then essentially give them a diagnosis of what was happening inside their body. And he was mapping the neurological system in the early 1900s. He was talking about the synapse issues with depression and anxiety, and talking about the mind-body connection, and that we have another brain in our gut, like way before all this stuff became common knowledge. And then he also talked quite a bit about spirituality, and like where do souls come from, and what are our purpose here, and all of that. And so that got me interested in spirituality. And so I started developing a practice, connecting with God, talking with God, doing meditations with intention and purpose. And I realized at this point, I started to realize, well, if you want to get back to, out of pain and into, thriving again, there's multiple buckets. There's physical bucket, taking care of your physical body. There's mental, right? Learning something new, putting yourself in new surroundings. There's emotional health, and then there's spiritual health. So to this day, I try to put energy into all the buckets. Because sometimes I see folks who, they're in great shape, they're running all the time, they're working out, but they're not working on themselves spiritually. They're not working on the mental, right? Learning new things. They're not working on, emotions. And that's kind of how I was. I was physically fit. From the outside looking in, everybody was like, this guy has it all together. I had a good job. I went to university, got 2 master's degrees. I had a nice house up in Scottsdale when I first moved here after the service. I looked great on paper, had pretty girlfriends, all that good stuff. Nice cars, I had a boat. So from outside looking in, like, Michael's got it going on, he's got it all figured out. But deep down inside, like, I was a mess. I was a mess. I was waking up every day gagging and essentially purging. And I didn't really learn about this word purging until years later when I dove into my first ayahuasca experience. But the body essentially is trying to get rid of this energy. And so this built up energy in the body has got to go somewhere, or else it creates a lot of problems. So every morning I'd wake up, I'd take a shower, and I would gag and sometimes puke, and usually I had a bad night's sleep, and I'd put it all together, I'd put my clothes on, and I would just go back out there and just go to work and get shit done. That's just kind of how I was driven, and that's how I was trained in my military service. And so I was able to just get shit done. And so eventually I had to change, obviously, a lot of patterns and behaviors. And this is kind of like our current state. A lifestyle change is a hard sell. And I work with a lot of people who are working on their health, mentally, physically, emotionally, and everyone kind of wants a quick fix. Even the biohacking world is very quick fix. It's like, we got this new gadget, and this is gonna fix everything. And it's like, it's gonna help. It's an assist. I look at all those things as assistance, but there's really no silver bullet. I'm yet to find the silver bullet. You know, and now you have all the peptide bros, you know, take this peptide or fix everything. I still haven't found the silver bullet. So if you guys found one, you let me know. But lifestyle change is a tough sell.
BPC 157, bro.
Wolverine, right?
1290.
So because I had this interest in indigenous cultures, because I was stepping into the world of spirituality, because I was trying to find my way out of pain, I was implementing Dr. John Sarno's work, which was unresolved emotions is creating your physical pain, and the science of that is essentially your nervous system is more prone to sympathetic tone, which is the fight or flight mechanism of our autonomic nervous system, and that essentially you're having blood flow and oxygen delivery issues, because when you're in fight or flight, blood goes to the extremities, right? You gotta fight, you gotta flight. And essentially, if you're constantly stuck in this sympathetic tone, your body's never able to quite heal. And also you're not getting the blood flow, you know, to the gut and to the rest and digest mechanisms of the body. And so I think a lot of people in our culture are really stuck in that high sympathetic tone, that anxious state, that high beta brain waves, that place where they're impulsive and they're reactionary. And that's just a great mechanism for danger. You know, if you're on the highway and there's a piece of debris in the road, you want to be impulsive and reactionary and get out of the way. In a fight or flight situation and danger, it serves a purpose. But to spend our entire day there, or most of our waking state, other systems are going to start to break down. And so you got to get a control over your nervous system. And nervous system training became like my new passion and new study. And that eventually took me to Wim Hof, but I'll get there soon. So essentially I went to the Amazon jungle. My first invitation to plant medicine in this capacity, although I did experiment with LSD when I was 16, it was wonderful. And it wasn't very in a ceremonial type of way, but I got to see, you know, how the world can live and breathe and that kind of stuff. And it was a beautiful moment for me when I was a teenager. And I just looked at it as like it's a drug, you know? There's really no therapeutic benefit. It was a cool experience that I had as a teenager. I had some great stories to tell, but essentially I left that behind. So now, post-military, I'm working for a university. I worked my way up the ranks. I became a senior director of operations. You know, I was pretty straight and narrow in that sense. Talking about psychedelics was like, why would I even explore psychedelics? That's a drug, and I'm trying to like not do drugs. So like, why would I want to go that route? That was kind of my frame of thinking. But I was a documentary junkie, and there was a documentary about DMT. It was a DMT, the spirit molecule. And they don't really talk too much about ayahuasca in that documentary. They touch on it, but they talk more about the studies that they did at Johns Hopkins. And so I started to understand the correlation of like, okay, ayahuasca has DMT, and these people took DMT. And so I was interested in it. So I got my first invitation to go to Brazil. And I went to Brazil in 2014, and I was introduced to a lovely woman who was working with ayahuasca in a local group there. And they have a lot of different types and traditions. They have the Santo Daime. You guys familiar with the Santo Daime? And so my very first experience with ayahuasca was actually Santo Daime, which is a very interesting first-time experience. I mean, you know, if you guys, I'm sure most people in this room have had experiences, you know, usually you sit in a dark room, you close your eyes, you go inward, you see what comes, you get sick throughout the night, you let it go, and you get back to, you know, some of the beauty of it. You know, you work through your emotional baggage and trauma, and opens many doors in many ways. Santo Daime was tough because it's a lighted room, you're wearing all white. They would make me sing in Portuguese, so I had a little book in my hand. I'm under the influence of ayahuasca for the first time, and they make you do a dance called the bailado. You guys familiar with the bailado? It's like a two-step, you know? And the guy with the shaker would shake, and you have to stay within the tiles. I remember if you stepped out of the tile, he would get pissed. Like a strong Brazilian guy. And that was my first experience. And I was like, that was really tough. And I'm like, getting some insights, and the light's bothering me because who the hell wants bright light when you're under the influence of that, right? Trying to do the dance and the tiles. But one thing I took from that ceremony is that this guy was so badass that he was controlling the room with a rattle. He had a tiny little rattle. And there was women on that side of the room and men on this side of the room. And we would do the bailado this way, they would do the bailado that way. It was this beautiful kind of like harmonious dance to the music. And he was just orchestrating this with that rattle and singing songs. And, you know, eventually we'd all find our groove, and there'd be some people puking to the side. But I was like, man, that guy's powerful. And he controlled his whole room with a rattle, you know? And so I left that ceremony. And the girl I was with was like, listen, that was your first ayahuasca experience. Please don't judge ayahuasca based on scented dining. It's beautiful, it's good, but there's other ways to do it. Like, just give it another shot, you know? I know this other tribe. They're gonna come into the city. They're gonna be hosting a ceremony next weekend. I'm gonna sign us up for that. And I'm gonna introduce you to some other things too. Like this frog poison.
Oh,
And
thanks.
this stuff that they blow up your nose. And so I got the full gamut the next weekend. 2 big doses of ayahuasca. In the morning they gave us the rapé. After that they lined us up like cattle for the cambo.
Ugh.
And never forget, we were sitting in those, you know, those plastic white chairs that everyone uses in South America. I love those plastic white chairs, they're everywhere. They lined us all up. And the guy comes over to me, and I'm nervous because I don't speak Portuguese. There's no doctors in this room. I'm about to get poisoned. And the girl that I was with was like passed out in the corner because she just got cambo, and so she was offline. And I'm like, if I need help, like, who the hell can I talk to? And so sure enough, the guy looks at me and he goes, siete. And I got 7 dots. And I think that's a big dose for your first time. They gave me 7 dots. They put a big thing of poison. They had the frog all stretched out. It knocked the shit out of me. And I was sick, and I was nauseous, and I was sweaty, and I thought my heart's gonna stop. And I'm like, my mom doesn't even know what the hell's going on. She don't even know where I am right now. Like, this is not a good situation to put myself in. But the experience was powerful, and when the medicine wore off, I felt amazing. I felt the clearest clarity I've ever had. A whole night of doing ayahuasca, followed by a big, and Brazilians are really heavy on the rapé. They're really heavy, like they don't go light, and all their stuff is fire. And so I like the fire. But I know I needed that. Like, my ego was so stuck, was so strong, I was so thick-headed. Like, I need a baseball bat to like shift my ways, to shift my thinking, to shift my perception. Like, you know, I don't take the yellow flags and follow them. Like, I wait till shit gets really bad, and then I'm forced to make change. And I don't want to live my life like that anymore. I don't want to have to get hit with a baseball bat every time I needed to shift direction. And so that medicine was really powerful. What I loved about indigenous medicine is that you have to be involved in your own healing. You got to go through a process. You're going to have to suffer. You might throw up. You might cry. You might have some sort of emotional reaction. You got to go through a process and not just take this, it'll work, I'll see you in a month. And you take the pill and you don't even know what's happening. You don't know the biology, the chemistry of that. You don't know, oh, okay, that's helping my gut health, or it's helping mitochondria. You just stuck taking the pill and not sure if it works or not. But indigenous medicine is different. It's like you're gonna go through the process. You're going to experience some discomfort. You're gonna allow things to come to the surface so that you can see them more clearly. And so I started to understand their way, and I was like, okay, I really like that. You know, I feel like I'm participating in my healing here. And it was powerful, it was beautiful. And the very next day, we drove to Rio de Janeiro. We had a wonderful trip and a beautiful experience. And that was my first experience with plant medicine. Eventually, I got to a place where I had experienced plant medicine. a variety of times and have done a variety of ceremonies at this stage of my life. And I came across a Vice documentary about Wim Hof and how he can control his immune system and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, man, this guy's badass. And like the language that he was speaking was very much the language that the shamans were speaking in Brazil, because he was saying things like, the cold is my teacher. I mean, how can cold water be a teacher, you know? But the native folks from South America were saying the plants were their teacher. Little did I know that they had like direct communication with plants, you know? I thought it was just like a cool thing to say. Little did I know they're really having deep connection with these plants. And I learned all about dieting and dietas and how they channel and that whole element of spirituality, which is amazing. And Wim was saying similar things, that he was essentially connecting with like essentially the water element and going through these deep meditations while he was in this cold water, and it taught him how to breathe deeper and start to control his autonomic nervous system. And he didn't know what to do with all that because he's not a scientist, but he just knew that he felt good. And he was completing all of these crazy feats. He had 26 Guinness records at one time. He had swam under the polar ice caps for 6 minutes and held his breath. He hiked Mount Everest in his shorts with no oxygen, no shirt. Like, he was doing all these badass things, and everyone just said, oh, he's superhuman. That's just, you know, he's different. And he's like, no, I'm not different. I can teach you. And then eventually they did a study. What he realized, and Joe Dispenza says this all the time, like, the language that we use in the West is science. So if you want to really get to the masses, you have to bring it through science. And you've seen that in the psychedelic community now, right? There's just more and more science, more studies, and now it's becoming even more wide open, which is great. But essentially it's the language that we use. And so he basically donated himself to science so that they could do all these experiments, is really start to understand the hormones that are being released, the endocannabinoid system that's like been the latest research on the Wim Hof method, and how that's essentially the master switch of so many different things, and how this method, the cold exposure and the breathing exercise, were impacting that. When I dug into Wim's story a little bit, I realized that this was old medicine. This wasn't something new and faddish, you know, because you started seeing people posting, you know, cold plunging online, you know, kind of trendy, right? I was doing it before it was trendy. I was doing it when everyone thought I was a psychopath. But eventually it got popular, and now pretty much you see everyone doing it. But he was talking about the cold as his teacher and having this control over his body. So by this time, I had started to practice the Wim Hof method myself. It was very easy. It was like 30 deep breaths, followed by inhale, exhale, hold, followed by an inhale, hold, 15 seconds, 2, 3, 4, 5 rounds, and usually you're flying pretty high. And then the cold exposure was super powerful because it was like getting into the ice tub, being able to center my mind, being able to like let go of control. Because I think as Westerners, we probably all have one thing in common. We're all a little bit of control freaks. Anybody else control freak in here? Right? So I was a control freak, that's for sure. I still have those tendencies, but I'm learning to let go. What was great about the ice bath was like teaching me how to let go real time, how to surrender. And surrender wasn't a word I like to use, right? Because you want to fight through everything. But this mechanism is really where the beauty was. This is where the power was. And so ayahuasca, kambo, rapé, ice baths, breath work, one thing they all had in common: surrender. You have to surrender. And I sat in many ceremonies over the years, well over 100. And I've seen a lot of people who just couldn't surrender, and their whole night was miserable, you know, allowing, you know. So there's a really, the master switch is that letting go, that surrender, trusting. And there's a lot of beauty and power in that. So Wim Hof was very influential in my life, and eventually I went on to become one of his U.S.-based instructors in 2018. I became a U.S.-based instructor. I got to train with him in the mountains of Mount Hood, Oregon. If you guys ever been there, it's a wonderful place. I got to Arizona, went to do the training there. I found him in LA. He was actually doing a seminar in LA. I drove out to LA. I was with his vibe, like all the people that were following his work. And I was like, these are the people I want to be around. This is it for me. I loved the science. They had all kinds of guest speakers. I liked his message. His message was health, happiness, and strength. And when I was in the Navy, our message was so others may live. When I was in corporate, it was like, how can you make us more money? You know, there was no driving force that like I could really get behind in corporate America. But the Navy I could get behind, is so others may live, and his message I can get behind. And so on my way home from LA, 2017, 17 or 18, I said I'm going to let go of my job and surrender because I had golden handcuffs. You guys know what golden handcuffs are? You're working a career, you're not fully engaged, you're making great money, you're not really into the mission, but you're making great money and they keep giving you bonuses. And I came up like a poor kid from Queens. Money was always an issue in my household. Mom was always, sacrificing because she couldn't feed herself because she was feeding us. Or the heat would go out in winter and we had to wait to get the bill paid to get the heat turned on. So it was always like this issue with financial, And so I had programming around that, lots of programming. And so for me to leave the good, secure, safe job to go into the world of teaching people how to do breath work and ice baths, my family was like, what the hell did I want? You have 2 master's degrees, you have a house, you're doing great. They didn't know what was really going on because I didn't share, because I wasn't comfortable being vulnerable. I didn't realize vulnerability was power. I thought vulnerable, I only want to show people the side of me that I want them to see. That's how I live my life. Oh, Michael got all the boxes checked, and he's doing great. I stepped into the world of vulnerability through many teachers, Lynn being one of them, and realized there's really a lot of power and you connect with people on a much deeper level, when you're just open to being vulnerable and sharing true self. Because there's somebody in that crowd that's like, yeah, me too. I've been there. And I think there's a lot of power and beauty in that. Let's see where this goes next. Became a U.S. base instructor for WIM, that's me on the top of Mount Hood. I left my corporate high-paying job of 13 and a half years to dive into the world of entrepreneurship, which entrepreneurship was an interesting thing for me because I always looked at entrepreneurship like, man, that looks badass. And that's cool. Because when you work in a corporate environment, you might have great ideas, but getting those ideas up the chain where they'll actually be executed is very low. And even though I was a senior director of operations, I was 2 down from the vice president, and I was being groomed to become a vice president, I still feel like I didn't have any real impact in the company. There's too many layers. So the idea of becoming an entrepreneur, and I said, wait, I can take my idea and put it into play and actually see if it works, was exciting and scary for me too. Because if it doesn't work, guess what? You don't get paid, right? And so I was used to just getting paid every 2 weeks. That's how I lived most of my life. And so entrepreneurship was scary, but I also saw it as the next chapter because I've already done military government work and I understood that system. I already done 13 and a half years of corporate work. I've never been self-employed, never been an entrepreneur, never dove into that. I just kind of fantasized about it through people I followed. And so here's some things I learned along the way. Thoughts are powerful. Choose wisely. Our inner dialogue, how we talk to ourselves, how we talk about others, holds vibration and frequency. Words are powerful. And so I tried to do my best to be mindful of what I speak. And I learned that through a variety of authors and people that I follow. I take personal responsibility 100% for everything that I do in my life. Good things and bad things. It's very easy to be a victim. It's very easy to blame. It's very easy to talk about circumstances. It could be something as getting sick or financially not in a great place, you know, and basically we created that in some way, shape, or form. Like we put ourselves in this position, but we also don't do a good job of like patting ourselves on the back when something goes really well, you know. And so I think that's a really powerful lesson that I always try to keep as much awareness as possible. I use nature for everyday stress. I work with the 4 elements of nature: plants, air, breathing exercises. I work with light. I work with water therapies. I work with heat. I work with nature. I feel like nature has all the answers if we just put ourselves into that environment. And if you really think about it, human beings have been walking the planet for a very long time. We've crossed continents, we've crossed oceans, we've crossed seas. The human body is super resilient, and we're a really badass species. But ultimately, we've gotten really comfortable, and we don't like implement these mechanisms and the software that is inside of us. You know, something as simple of just being cold. You know, people always talk about ice baths, or ice baths good for women, or is cold therapy good for women? I'm like, 100 years ago, they didn't have a choice. Like, what are you talking about? There's no hot water heaters. Like, how do they take a bath? How do they take a shower? What about the people who were traveling from Virginia to Utah in the middle of winter on horse and buggy? Do you think they had insulated SUVs and heat in their car, and at nighttime they'd take a warm shower and settle down for bed? They froze their ass off all the time. They woke up cold, they went to bed cold, maybe they got around the fire for a little bit, but they're always cold. They had to work in the cold, they walked in the cold, everything was cold. And in the summertime, everything was hot. The Native American people that were, you know, here in this land were dealing with the extreme Arizona temperatures. And then if you're in Flagstaff, you're dealing with the extreme cold in the middle of winter. What are their options? They're always cold. So the body has these amazing mechanisms inside if you just tap into that. And so that's really the world that I play in now. What's this one here? When I'm down, I create healthy routines, you know? At the end of the day, like, life is gonna life you, right? And you're gonna have bad news, and you're gonna get out of your routines, you're gonna fall off the wagon, so they call it. When I start to notice I'm falling off the wagon in different areas of my life, I started to clean up my discipline. Simple wins. I try to find the small wins in every single day, little wins. Here, it could be making my bed, starting my day off with a routine, committing to a breath work exercise, saying I'm going to do this every day for 30 days, maybe journaling, reading that book, whatever your jam is, you know, tightening up that discipline. You know, if it's financial, it's like, okay, I'm going to really cut my spending, I'm going to really pay attention to my bank account, you know. So I always try to find areas of my life where I can use more discipline. What we dams us back. I learned about that, and that's, you know, you can get really into the metaphysical element of that, you know, projection, right? In my first ayahuasca ceremony, well, actually it was my second, it wasn't Santo Daime, it was my second one in Brazil. And I had spent some time in the Peruvian rainforest as well, and done some experiences there as well. But ayahuasca taught me about how to send emails. Would you believe that? I would never ever in my life think that ayahuasca was so practical. And so here I am in the middle of my ayahuasca ceremony, and at the time I was working for the university, and they were doing massive layoffs at the time. And so like every 6 months, you would just see people getting laid off. The company was going through changes. Everyone was in a fear state. Everyone was petitioning for their job. Everyone was leveraging. My department's really important. You know, all this kind of stuff. And so ultimately, people were not being cohesive and collaborative. They were more like positioning themselves against each other, and I felt that energy in the company. And so I was doing the same. And so what I learned about that was like, how you feel about something or someone, you attach to that email, you attach to that text message. And so even though you might make that text message or email really pretty and professional and and it looks good, you're attaching that energy to it if you're in that heightened, aggravated state. And when you send that message, they are receiving exactly how you feel, no matter how good it looks. And we do that all the time. We impulsively text people back, we impulsively send emails back, we're aggravated about something. And so I really had to learn how to like step away, get clear with how I felt about the situation before I sent that message. It was very practical for me. It was something that was very important for me because I was actually creating a mess in my relationships by the way I was communicating with people. And that's why I liked ayahuasca so much. It was like a great mirror to show me like, here's what you're doing, and here's how it's affecting other people, and now I'm gonna give you a taste of how they feel from the way you're treating them. And then you're like, oh wow, like, I'm sorry, Mom, like I'm so, you know, like sorry, like I had no idea, you know, there's a really awareness. And so I do my best to practice gratitude, self-love, and bless those who give me challenges. And also my body's my vessel, and so I do everything I can to take care of it, keep my body strong, youthful, and keep my vitality up. So that's all I have for the slides. You know, I don't know how we are in time. We might be past time or close to time.
Fine.
But it's really just a little bit of journey of kind of how I got here. I've worked with, I know this is the Arizona Psychedelic Society, so maybe I'll touch a little bit more on that. I'm not an expert in plant medicine or anything like that. I've had a lot of experiences. I've had a lot of journeys. I've been in a position where I was we call a guardian or a helper and assist in those types of ceremonies. I had a lot of neurological issues because of my surgery and the pain that I went through. So my hands were really clumsy. I had a hard time tying my shoes because your cervical spine connects to all the nerves that control your arms. So I had atrophy issues, strength issues, clumsy fingers, that kind of stuff. And because I was so inspired by that guy with the rattle, I picked up a rattle. And I learned how to rattle to the rhythm, you know, of the music inside the ceremonies. And if you're not a good rattler inside a ceremony, you would drive somebody nuts sitting next to you. Like, some people just want to get along and contribute. You're like, please put that down. You're driving me nuts. So the guy I was working with, he was super precise, man. He didn't want any, if you weren't in rhythm or like in the frequency of what was going on, like he's going to tell you to put down the rattle, right? And so, yeah, exactly. And so I got really good at the rattle, and I found a way to create that frequency in every song, and that was really good to get into rhythm. And then I translated that to the African djembe, and so that was my next level, was to go from rattle, which if anybody's interested in starting like learning how to drum, I always tell people like, oh, I want to go to drum circle, and drum circle is usually like really sloppy, and there's like a handful of people that could actually play, that could kind of keep the rhythm going well, and then just a lot of noise in the rest. But if you want to get really good at playing the drums, start with a rattle, because then you can start to find the rhythm, you know? And so I transferred from the rattle to the African djembe and took lessons and practice and got pretty decent, which was amazing for me because I had clumsy hands. And so my connection with my neurological system like greatly improved from learning how to play the African djembe and then eventually handpans and other rhythmic instruments. And so that was really awesome. And that was something that ayahuasca was telling me, pick up that rattle, pick up that drum, like that's your path. And so now I've been playing rattles and drums and handpans and all kinds of stuff. My biggest moment ever is when Wim Hof invited me on stage in front of like 2,000 people at one of his events that he did up in San Jose, and I brought my drum randomly, you know, I was helping out with his event, and he's like, you with the drum, come up here. And I got to play in front of, you know, a few thousand people, which was pretty cool. So music has always been this great teacher for me because I always had that label of like, I'm not musical, you know, music is for other people. But I actually believe that, you know, every single one of us is a musician. And we're attracted to a certain vibe, you know. Some people are attracted to wind instruments and flutes and didgeridoos and that beauty. Some people are interested in rhythmic instruments. I've always been really connected to African culture. I love African music. I love African dance. I just, you know, back in the 90s, growing up in Queens, I liked, you know, African-American music, you know, rap and hip-hop and all that kind of stuff. So I never cared about words of songs. Like my favorite songs, I couldn't tell you what they're saying, but I like the song because if it's got a good beat, then like I'm into it. So I always follow the rhythm. pianists and guitarists, right? Strings, right? Strings pulling your heart. So I think, and vocals, beautiful vocals, right? So I think every one of us is a musician in some sort of way, and we just haven't gained the confidence to even give it a try or get past the initial hurdles. Because believe me, my first couple of beats on the drum were not very good. It's super noisy. But just to get back to the world of psychedelics, I had a lot of experiences, a lot of beautiful ones. In all my journeys with the Brazilian culture, Peruvian culture, folks here in the United States, I never had a bad trip. You know? And I tell people that all the time because a lot of veterans are interested in psychedelic medicine now. And they've been interested for a little while. Matter of fact, there's a really cool documentary, on Netflix about a Navy SEAL program, right? Going down to Mexico. Has anybody watched that one yet?
So Waves, what's it called?
Waves of War.
Yeah, that's it.
Yep.
That's a good
And
one.
so I have a buddy that I served with in the Navy, and he was a SEAL Team 6 guy. I mean, that's badass. I mean, that's the highest level of the Navy SEAL teams. And he was as square as you can be. I mean, he's super square, like grew up Midwest, Christian family, went to the Navy. He was an ordnance guy, so he used to load our bombs and missiles for us. And then he got an opportunity to go into the SEAL program, passed, became a SEAL, and because he was so good, he got an opportunity years later to go and interview for the Dept group, which is the SEAL Team 6, and he got qualified in SEAL Team 6, and then spent the rest of his career in SEAL Team 6. And when I caught up with him after he retired, he gave me a call. And we're just talking about life. He goes, man, I see all the things that you're doing with the Wim Hof, and that's super badass. And he goes to tell me that he went down to Mexico, and he was dealing with some stuff. And he did the Ibogaine treatment, and he did the Bufo treatment, and how much pressure it took off of him, and how he was able to navigate his life. And so that was really amazing to see that these special operators were going down, and they actually had a program where they paid for him to go, which is pretty cool too. And so a lot of veterans, you know, they're always asking me about psychedelics and whatnot, and people are scared that they're going to lose their mind or not have control, right? I said, well, that's part of the deal, you know. You're kind of going there to let go of control, so yeah, there will be moments where you don't have any control, but that's where the healing is in many cases. So it's actually a good lesson for us. And I never had a bad trip. I've had some hard moments, right? And I had to look in the mirror, and I had to see how my behavior was impacting other people. And you know, I've done so many ayahuasca ceremonies. At one point in my life, I think I was drinking ayahuasca 3 weekends a month for like 2.5 years or something like that. So I was on a steady pace. I was living a super clean life, energetically, made a lot of significant changes in my life, beautiful changes. And with each ceremony, I would just go a little bit deeper because I felt like she would open more doors for me as I started to live a cleaner, kind of more disciplined, pure life, kindness, more I opened my heart, really. What do they say? The longest road in life is the journey from your head to your heart. You know, I really believe that. And I'm still on that journey. And so I really learned a lot about kindness and being kind to people with no expectations. Not like, well, I'm going to be kind to you, but like I want something from you, so I'm only going to be kind because there's a transaction. Really just learning how to be kind and open up my heart and give and connect people. Like, you would be awesome to meet this guy because I know what you do and I know what he does, and you guys are going to make some magic together, so you guys need to meet, and I don't need anything in return. And so I've really done my best to just live that sort of life. I started a business here in town called Optimize, and in 2000, thank you. In 2018, we opened up the doors. And the reason why I started the business is because I was teaching workshops. I'd become a US-based Wim Hof instructor, and I was now stepping into presentation and doing workshops and recruiting people to show up to the workshops, which is the hardest part of this. And I was selling out, man. Every workshop I did, it was like 25, 30, 35 people. We did some big groups, you know, and people would come and I would meet all these beautiful people, amazing people. They all had amazing stories to share. I got cancer and I'm working through that. This person just lost, you know, their daughter or something like that, like hard stories. this guy was a military guy, you know, had tons of PTSD, and his life has been a wreck, and all these interesting people just come into my class, and I was connecting with them and teaching them some simple tools, cold exposure, how to get your mind under control, the power of surrender, power of letting go, talking about the science of what's happening in the body when you step into the ice bath, how you're basically giving yourself this controlled hormetic stressor of, you know, big cocktail of dopamine and noradrenaline, and how it's a powerful anti-inflammatory. I became like a science geek, and I've been studying for years now, lecturing all over the world. I got great opportunities. I got invited to go speak in Mexico at one of the top schools. It's basically their version of MIT in Monterrey, Mexico. It's called Tec de Monterrey. The director of leadership for Google hired me to go speak to like 50 of his top entrepreneur students there. Ecuador, you know, speaking with physicians, and I was always intimidated by doctors. I was like, oh man, I'm gonna get doctors in my class, and they're gonna try to, you know, challenge me, you know, on some of these things. And so that just pushed me to study harder and really know my stuff, and also realize that they have gaps. They have a lot of gaps, and they went through a lot of school. There's a lot of things that they forgot or maybe touched on in medical school that they haven't really dove into. And me, I've been looking for that silver bullet. You know, I'm still looking for that silver bullet. And really what I found, I haven't found the silver bullet, but I found the mechanism to like good longevity and health. And it all comes down to mitochondria health, improving mitochondria health, which is the energy system of the body, which is essentially a bunch of bacteria that live inside of our cells, which essentially mitochondria is foreign. We don't even know, it's like alien. And essentially that's what's generating this life force energy that keeps us going. And so when the mitochondria start to break down through our habits, through our thinking as well, depressed low energy states, you know, all this stuff has impact on mitochondria. And so essentially what I work with now and optimize is stress training, using things like cold plunges, breath techniques. We have biocharger, PEMF therapy, red light therapy, saunas, heat stress, heat shock proteins, cold shock proteins, all of these different mechanisms that occur in the body. And I'm just giving people a sample of these therapies that have existed in nature for a long time, because I work with light, I work with air, I work with water, I work with heat, essentially creating that inside of our centers, but then infusing the spiritual work that was very positive for me. So I play ceremonial music in the centers, and Native American singing, and African music, and shamanic music, and global kind of music from around the world, because that has frequency and vibration in those medicine songs. And your average person doesn't really know what a medicine song is. You don't even know that it's affecting their experience. And so I put together with my business partner curated flow of therapies, but also the most important element, which is the social community element. Being able to feel accepted, feel good in the place where you're at, connect with other people, make new friends, you know. In our centers, we have, I think, 5 marriages that came out of our center. You know, people who organically met and had made a beautiful connection and got married. I'm always so I say that, I brag about it a lot because I'm really proud of that. I never expected it to be that way, by the way. It's just something that occurred after the fact. You know, if you build it, they will come. And so the community element is also very important, I think, in our healing, mentally, physically, emotionally, is a very important element. And so we now have 4 locations, and we've been just kind of sharing that work. I was one of those guys always bitching online about the government, you know, like the healthcare and this and that, and they're putting shit in our food, and I still bitch about it too. But I got to the point, I was like, I'm sick of bitching about it. I just need to go do something about it. You know, and that's the beauty in entrepreneurship, you know? I had like the medical system this and it did that, and I'm like, I don't want to be a victim of pointing the fingers on a broken system. How about I just take what I learned, keep it simple, and introduce it to people and help educate them. And I'm not impacting the entire world, but I'm impacting the small communities, you know, at each center. And so that's really what I've been up to.
Oh, yeah.
And that's been, my goal is to continue to spread that through public speaking and education and providing a place where people can go. And so that's the mission that I've been on for some time now, and it's been a beautiful journey. I've met so many wonderful people. And
Michael, I think we should open up for questions.
yeah,
Anybody
I
has
think
any
that's
questions?
great,
Because we only got
I'm running out of
a
stuff to
couple
talk
more
about,
minutes here
so.
before.
Beautiful. Anybody have any questions about my experiences, about your experiences, about the nervous system, anything? What was your name?
Abby,
Abby?
did you end up getting the neck surgery, and if not, did things just like naturally resolve through all the
Yeah, great question, because I never followed up on that. I never did get the second neck surgery. I got the first one. From that point on, I never took another medication. To this day, you couldn't even give me an Advil. I won't take it. Can't give me a Tylenol. Can't give me a muscle relaxer. I won't take it. I'll use, I'll have a kratom drink. I smoke some weed every now and then. I'll use plants and other ways, or cold stress or something if I'm dealing with inflammation. But I never did the other surgery, because what I learned was, as I started to do the deep dive on my healing, John Sarno's book started to tell me, go to the times in your life when you were experiencing the most pain. In my case, it was the neck pain. What was happening in your life at that time? Where were your thoughts? What was your emotions? What was your environment? And I'm like, oh man, that was messy. Yeah, I had broken relationships with women. I was not getting great sleep. I was overdoing it. My ego was way inflated. I can solve everything on my own. I had a bad relationship with my father. I had a mediocre relationship with my mother. I had a sister that we weren't talking to. I had these problems. And so I really started to go back to those times where it was at my worst and say, what was my environment? And so that forced me to clean up my environment. And so the cleaner I started living my life, my thinking, my patterns, that's when I started to actually find, I went 2 weeks without pain. I went 3 weeks without any pain or symptoms. I went a month. Now it's been a whole quarter where I haven't experienced any pain. And what's funny is that pain will come back and it'll irritate me when I start to live sloppy. Emotionally, mentally, physically, don't take care of myself, that whole self-love mechanism, it'll start to creep in. And I was going through some serious stress about 6 months ago, and I wasn't on my path like I typically am. And sure enough, mornings, throwing up, gagging, anxiety, restless nights, and I'm like, okay, thank you, I got the signal. I don't need a baseball bat. I'm gonna start getting this in order, And so one other thing I want to say about ayahuasca, and I'll take the next question, is that ayahuasca is an amazing teacher. I also was a seminar junkie for a little while, because I got really interested in going to seminars and really excited about public speakers and business and success and all that kind of stuff. And what I felt was they were like seminar junkies. They'd come in on a Friday, they'd go to the seminar Saturday and Sunday, they'd be jumping up and down about the new concept, and come Monday, they would go back to the same old story, do the same old thing, and then they would just wait for the next seminar, and then they were jumping up and down, making all these connections, doing all this stuff, and right back to, I saw that in a spiritual community too, quite a bit, because I was seeing all the people that would come in for the ceremonies, and they'd be all excited for the healing, they'd be all about this, and then on Monday, they're right back to the same habits. And then they wait for the next ceremony. So I would call them ceremony junkies. And I think that's really common. And so the hardest part about plant medicine has always been the next day, the week later. It's the phone call. Hey mom, I want to apologize to you. I want to tell you how I've been acting, how I've been feeling, and how I projected that onto you, how I've been blaming you. I had to call my father years ago and apologize to him. He's like, apologize to me? I left you kids. I left your mom. I was the one wrong. He said, yeah, that's your own stuff.
you know, for you to work out, yeah. But Dad, I'm not going to blame you anymore. I'm not gonna blame you for my relationship issues. I'm not gonna blame you. Like, you did what you had to do at that stage of your life, you know what I mean? And I just want to start new with you. I just want to start fresh with you. I want to enjoy the rest of our years together and not have this story all the time about how my dad didn't do this or that. And I had a beautiful relationship with him up until he died 2 years ago. And we had just a beautiful connection, and we enjoyed each other's company. And he came out to Arizona to visit me, and we went to the Barrett-Jackson because he was a car guy. And we drove to California, and we laughed and we joked, and it was a beautiful relationship. And at the end of his life, when he was in his deathbed, we talked about that. And that was the work, not the throwing up in the ceremony, not the the extra dose. It was the phone calls and the action. And that's where I think a lot of folks fail, because that's kind of the hard part, So, any other questions?
Yeah, integration. Obviously, that's huge. That's one of the biggest things with psychedelics that makes them effective. And if you fail that part of it, you're not going to get very far. And forgiveness is always for the other person. It's not for the other person. It's for you. It's always for you. It's not for the person you're forgiving.
Right.
So I did want to touch on you just touched briefly on sensory deprivation tanks, and I've had some handful of experience with those, but I've noticed an hour doesn't cut it. Like
Right.
if you don't get in there for at least like 2 hours or more, you don't really get into that space. Do you ever do it for that long, or did you find that too?
I was going to a place in Tempe where you would book the hour session, so that's kind of all I knew was, you book the hour sessions, you go in. And I never went too far down that rabbit hole. For me, it was something I played with. I heard Joe Rogan talking about it at one point, and I was like, I'm gonna go give this a try. Sensory deprivation tank, Phoenix. Oh, look at it, there's a place in Tempe. Cool, I'm gonna give it a shot. And I went in there, it was like a cool vibe, it was like spiritual vibe, and they were into like ancient history, and I was having these types of conversations with the guy who worked there. And do you guys know the cartoon Spirit Science? You guys ever watch that on YouTube? You guys know what I'm talking about? It was like a cartoon that they would make about all these types of ideas. And so the guy, they had Spirit Science actually did a cartoon on that center or whatever.
Nice.
But what was cool for me was it gave me that moment of like understanding where you can get to in meditation. I didn't get to the full place, I didn't go extremely deep, but it allowed me to like connect and get that aha moment of like, I get what people are talking about. And so I need to continue to work with this and develop my own practice.
Gotcha.
And so it's like a sample for me, and it was helpful. And it came right at the perfect time. What's your name, sir?
My name's Hector.
Hector. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. You spoke about things affecting your hands, numbness, a certain amount of clumsiness, like balance. Did that all go away with your practice? Or
Yes.
did you?
Yep. It's been many years now since my surgery. I'll be 47 this month. I run, I hike, I play drums, I lift weights, I do pull-ups, I swim. I actually teach an underwater confidence course where I give people 70-pound heavy balls and I drop them to the bottom of a 12-foot pool and have them do underwater drills. I do everything that I did in my military career, in my earlier years, I do today. Now, when I'm under a high load of stress in my everyday life, the first thing I will notice is my hands will get clumsy again. It's kind of like that thing that's like always there. But ultimately, I can tie my shoes. I'm pain-free. I pretty much live like I was when I was 25. I mean, I don't have all the same energy that I did, but I'm doing pretty good. And so ultimately, my symptoms, my pain, my neurological issues, they started to fall back in order, because I believe that the body has a very powerful intelligence and knows how to repair itself if you give it room and you allow your nervous system to be in that parasympathetic state. My issues, I think, really came from emotional baggage from my earlier years, It came from being in a job in the U.S. Navy of high chronic stress. And I always remember when I would fly at night, so I lived in Coronado, I lived in UTC, I worked in Coronado, lived in UTC, if you guys are familiar with the San Diego area, and we would do night flights on night vision goggles where we do really low flying out in the mountains. It was very dangerous, you had to be very aware, and night vision goggles are like looking through toilet paper tubes. You can't see shit, you know, and if the moon is not bright, you really can't see shit. And so your eyes are really strained because you're having to constantly cycle when you're in the door of a helicopter would be flying, you know, at 100 knots, 50 feet off the deck, you know, there's tree line and power lines and all kinds of stuff. And I never forget when we'd land and I'd be driving home and I'd go to bed that night, I could never quite settle down and get a good night rest. And so that's because my nervous system was just stuck in that high sympathetic tone. And I didn't know how to switch out of that. And that was practice that came many years later. Any other questions? What's your name? Alex? Yoga's an interesting thing. I have tons of respect for yoga. Yoga is old and badass and great and amazing. It was just never my path. I've always dabbled in yoga. I go to classes, I've done classes, but I never like went deep down the rabbit hole where I was like doing a student teacher program or had like a daily practice. But it's actually one of those things where I need more of it in my life. I need more yoga in my life actually. And so this year I'd like to implement more yoga into my life because there's a lot of positive things going on inside your body mentally that you just don't get from other types of physical activities. Also, preparing your body for meditation, which is, I think, the whole purpose of yoga. So, any other questions before we wrap it up?
Since you mentioned yoga, have you tried Qigong? Or
I
Tai
have
Chi?
dabbled with it. Never like fully committed, created practice, really stuck with it, but dabbled with it. And I understand the power and the ancient knowledge in it because I think the folks in the East were the masters. I call them the airbenders. You know, that Eastern philosophy of breathing, movement, martial arts, Qigong. They knew how to work with all that energy. I worked with a gentleman by the name of Master Zhao. Have anybody ever heard of Master Zhao? He comes from California. I think he's passed now. But he was one of the oldest airbenders that were still alive. And so he would actually be able to create heat from his hands and light tissue paper on fire. And they did documentary on him. A Marvel, who's the gentleman who did all the Marvel? Stan Lee, Superhuman, did an episode on him. And I got a chance to see him twice when I went out to California, when I was really at my worst. And I remember him saying when he did the body scan and did the whole procedure with me, that he says, you need to go pay attention to your organs, your liver and your kidneys. And then when I got the blood work done at the VA, maybe a month or so later, they were showing that I had all these elevated enzymes and basically a problem. And he was able to see that just through touch and heat. He literally would light your body on fire. It was so hot that it was like if I took an iron or like a curling iron for your hair and touched your skin with it. It was so hot. And you wouldn't even touch your skin. You just put your hands over your body. The amount of heat he was able to generate. He was definitely special and was definitely tapping into some like ancient knowledge that is probably not around so much anymore.
And you call him an airbender?
I call him an airbender.
Is that like an actual term, or is that something?
It's from that cartoon, The Last Airbender.
Street Fighter.
Yeah. Manipulating energy.
Give it up for Michael, everybody.
Awesome job, man. Yes, man, so much information. Yeah, thank you again for coming. And we have a couple announcements.